Hello, YouTubers out there. This is Jerry Saravia at the movies. So today we are discussing A Quiet Place Part 2. And this is, of course, the 2020, or, well, originally it was going to be released last year, but it didn't happen um, because of the pandemic, so it was released this year. And it's streaming now as we speak on Paramount Plus. But this is the first movie I've seen in theaters since, well, since a good 3 years now. So, A Quiet Place Part 2. First of all, the original film is a fantastic nail biter. It is just a terrific movie in terms of the use of sound, the concept of these aliens, these daddy long legs, to some degree, who just they run about as ferociously as you can imagine. They have hypersensitive hearing. They're alien creatures. We don't know what they're doing on Earth or what their purpose is, but they are blind, and any sound you make, they kind of just arrive. They scurry through the landscape and they arrive. Um, it's never clear just how many of these exist, but we can assume quite a few um, based on the first film and this one. So, Quiet Place Part 2 begins with a flashback, and the Abbotts, played in a with a repeat role for John Krasinski, who was, of course, the writer and director, or one of the writers anyway, for Quiet Place, and this sequel is Lee Abbott. And if you've seen the original film, you'll know that he sacrificed himself for his family in order to save the kids. But anyway, because this is day one, it's kind of like the prequel portion of this sequel. So we see the Abbotts, and they're at a baseball game, and their youngest, Marcus, who is deaf, played by Noah Jupe, is at bat, and then something is in the sky, a flaming object. We don't know what it is. Of course, I mean, they don't know what it is. We know it's probably some sort of alien or ship or something. Um, but it's a flaming object in the sky, and everybody kind of takes off from the baseball field because they don't know where this thing is headed or what sort of impact it's going to make. And John Krasinski, once again, is the father. Evelyn Abbott is Emily Blunt, a wonderful actress, who is, of course, John's real life wife. At any rate, she is the one who's pregnant with a child. And we see at the beginning these creatures suddenly start attacking everyone in town, and everybody starts making noise because they don't know that noise is really what brings these creatures out of nowhere. So after that, we flash forward to literally where the last film finished off, and that was with Evelyn holding a shotgun and Millicent Simmons playing Regan, who is deaf as well. So they have two deaf children. Millicent Simmons actually is deaf. I think Noah Jupe is not. So at any rate, Reagan has figured out the creature's weakness, their kryptonite, which is essentially the cochlear implant that she has. If you increase the volume, the creatures, they start to lose it because their hypersensitive hearing can't handle it. And that's where Mama shoots the creature with a shotgun, and more creatures now, of course, are headed their way. So they find out that there's a nearby neighbor. If you remember in the original film, on top of the one of the silos, they would have a flame, and they would initiate a flame or start a flame, like a little fire, as a signal, beacon. And they find that there are others who have similar beacons. So there are other survivors. So one of them being Emmett, played by Cillian Murphy, and he's living in a steel foundry by himself. His wife had been killed, and I believe his children, by these aliens. And he's armed to the teeth, but he has this speech where he tells Evelyn that he's not sure if he would be willing to go to a nearby island, where presumably off of the marina there may be some survivors, and maybe it's a retreat from all this madness. In other words, maybe the aliens can't really travel through the water. So that was a new wrinkle to this picture. I guess that could be a little spoiler alert. Sorry about that. Nonetheless, they find out about this island through Regan. She always has the radio, and in the radio there's a signal that's played called, or a song, Beyond the Sea by Bobby Darin. And so this could be an inhabited island, but Emmett is not sure that, sometimes there are certain people he feels that he shouldn't save. So we're not sure where our sympathies lie with this character. Nevertheless, Regan is determined to go to that island, despite Evelyn's objections, but she insists that Emmett go help her. Now, the emotional resonance of the first movie had a lot to do with the fact that this was a close-knit family. In other words, a father, a mother, 2 kids, they're deaf. Already our sympathies are lying with them. They can't communicate, they have to, everything's very quiet. Don't break anything. If you remember, they didn't eat their foods in plates. They had like these leaves. They put the food on that, and I mean everything was just, they had to be really quiet. And there's a sense of that apocalyptic sense of menace to this movie, because it's shot in upstate New York, and so you get the idea that there isn't much beyond the scenery. Even though it's beautiful scenery, they're sort of abandoned. Humanity has been virtually destroyed by these alien creatures. And we still don't know what these alien creatures are really up to, why they're there. Not that that's important, but with the sequel, not that I needed it, but it would have been nice to have a little more understanding as to what is really going on here. Why are these creatures blind? And what is it about this hypersensitive hearing? And why are they there? But that's really not significant. Of course, if he does a third Quiet Place, which he might, John Krasinski, he may explain that, but I'm not sure that the explanation is necessary, but I would have liked a little more insight into that. But that's not a flaw at all, because the original film worked without knowing it. The beauty of these 2 films is that if it was just about a family surviving in the wilderness, it would have worked just as effectively without the aliens. That's how good these characters are. But the original film had that family unit, and something about it was far more emotionally resonant than what you see in this film. So it's mostly now it's Emily Blunt who has to carry the movie. But the interesting thing is the 2 kids, they come into their own as well, and they figure out how to deal with this menace in ways in which, let's say, Emily Blunt never really considered. So, Evelyn. So that's what really makes the film very effective. Now, there is a scene that I wasn't exactly sure about. At the marina, there is this family of people. They're what they call a feral. I forget how to pronounce it. A feral family, like a feral dog or animal. And they seem almost as evil as the creatures. And I wasn't really sure what was their purpose in the film. Somehow I think it would have been better not to have seen these people. But if you're going to show people like this, where do they come from? What is their purpose? Why are they... It looked like they were ready to kill, spoiler alert, Emmett and Regan. And we don't know really what's going on or what they were trying to do or their purpose even. I didn't understand it. They set up a trap with this little girl, and it wasn't clear what was happening. And I would have liked maybe to have known more about the people living on this island, which they can somehow... It's almost a luxury, like they can have picnics and they can make, I guess, a little bit of noise, because they discover that the aliens can't travel through the water. So that was an interesting new angle to the sequel. But really, this movie is, by and large, despite those little criticisms, very effective film, very intense. The scene where Marcus has the baby infant, because as you remember, Emily Blunt, who was pregnant, gave birth to the baby, and that whole sequence in the original film was insane. But in this movie, Marcus keeps the crying infant inside a airtight bunker, which is at the steel foundry. And this is while Emily Blunt goes off to get medical supplies and so on and so forth. And the creatures outside of it, I have to say, the sequence itself was so tantalizing, so highly charged, at a maximum level of fright that I virtually almost passed out. I mean, it was really, I've never seen that kind of intensity in a horror film in quite some time. So that was really impressive. The other one that had me clutching the arms of my seat was the scene with Regan finding a lonely train car with corpses in it. It wasn't so much a couple of jump scares there, because jump scares, I mean, it's all fine and dandy. They're going to work in this movie even when you expect to see them. I didn't expect to see some of them that appeared, so that's always good, because usually they're fairly predictable and they don't do much for you. But the sequence itself, the inside of this train car, and when she steps out of it, and then of course one of the creatures arrives, you have to see this scene to appreciate it. John Krasinski knows how to do suspense. This man is a master. He's terrific. If he were to make more thrillers, just thrillers, he doesn't even have to do horror, and keeps the human angle first and foremost, he can work wonders. There's no question in my mind. This man is, I mean, I never thought that the actor who, from The Office would end up make such an indelible impression on me with these two films. So it's really extraordinary. So there you have it. This is a hell of a picture. Millicent Simmonds really comes into her own in this movie. She is practically the lead. That's how good she is. But she's so effective. I mean, all the actors were terrific. So, a couple of tidbits didn't exactly, not that they didn't work. My criticisms were very, very minor overall. They're minor quibbles for an otherwise great movie. But I just wish there was a little more exposure. I mean, even for an hour and a half movie, you could have worked it in a little, and but it is what it is. Nevertheless, check out A Quiet Place Part 2. The sequel could, by some critics, be called a rehash, but it is so much better than just a rehash, really. Because the same basic idea is there, but it is a reinvestment into these characters. It's an extraordinary thing. Usually most horror sequels abandon character development, stay away from characters, and just focus on the shocks, the gore, whatever. Here's a movie that gives us that. It's probably a little noisier picture than the first film, but it really focuses on the characters and their reactions in the midst of all this chaos. And that's what makes this movie work. So that the shift into Millicent Simmonds and Marcus in particular, that shift is extraordinary. It's different than the first film in terms of where the focus is in terms of the characters. So normally most sequels, they don't really get away with things like that because they don't do it. They're more dependent on other things that they thought were the secret of the success of the original. Here's a movie that knows what was the secret of the success, and it was the characters, first and foremost, in the midst of all this. Because if you don't care about the characters, you don't care about the horror. It's really just a freak show. So check it out. This is not a gory picture at all, and I appreciate that. Suspense, very tight. One hell of a movie. I mean, I really look forward to seeing it again, and I don't say that about a lot of horror sequels. I mean, it's been some time. I guess since, Nightmare on Elm Street would be one series to some degree that I always enjoyed watching each sequel. But this is a movie that really, not ante is not the word. It ups the ante on characters and our sympathy with them and hoping they get out of this. And yeah, I can't say enough. Check it out. Quiet Place Part 2. So please subscribe if you like what you hear to Jerry Saravia at the Movies. And I'll be doing more reviews, hopefully. And this is Jerry Saravia at the Movies, signing off.